On this episode, Henry Merschman, President and CEO of Merschman Fertilizer, joins us today for what he thinks is a Cup of Henry episode. Global markets, as well as Midwest river levels, lock and dam repairs, and flooding all affect supply, pricing, and logistics for Merschman Fertilizer. See how Henry has positioned the company for the coming year to service our local area farmers for all of their fertilizer needs. Ben releases a new maturity category for Merschman soybeans to plant in 2021. Listen in to hear what it is.
Hi, this is Joe Merschman. Welcome to Cup of Joe, episode number 29, season 2. Today we have Ben, Turk, and my brother Henry. And Henry's going to talk a little bit about fertilizer today. And you know, Henry, you never get on Cup of Joe very often. So this episode here, if you want to rename it, you can rename it.
Well, man, that's a surprise, Joe. I haven't thought about that at all. I don't like the limelight.
Doesn't look like it at all.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, I know in fertilizer it's supply, demand, and logistics. It looks like propane last year. We had plenty of propane, but not in the right place. And fertilizer last spring, with all the river flooding and whatnot, we couldn't get barges up to get fertilizer, and fertilizer got kind of tight. So fertilizer is really important to our farmers, and can't grow a crop hardly without it. So what are you seeing right now?
Well, living in an ag community, a rural community, I get asked a lot about, well, I heard fertilizer prices are down. I heard fertilizer prices are up. What's fertilizer prices doing, And my standard answer, I'll relate it to a story about my great uncle Ernie. He used to go fishing in Canada, and that's probably 40, 50 years ago, before cell phones. And so Hilda, his wife, would always say, "You call Ernie when you're on your way home." He said, "Okay." So he called on his way home one day, and he lived in West Point, and she said, "Where you at, Ernie?" He says, "Well, I'm south of the Canadian border." "Okay, well, drive safe." And then 30 minutes later, he walked in the door. She goes, "Well, I thought you were south of the Canadian border." "Yeah, I was in Mount Pleasant." "That's south of the Canadian border." So the point I'm trying to make is when people say, what are, fertilizer prices down? Were they down from, last week? Are they down from a year ago? Are they down from 2 years ago? It's a moving target. And I think the more important thing about prices is there's an index out there called the Plant Nutrient Affordability Index. And you can have very low prices on fertilizer, but if you have low prices on grain, it doesn't really probably help you. And so I will tell you this about fertilizer prices is in the last several years, there's a chart, and then they take the prices of grain and they compare them to prices of fertilizer, and then they put it on a chart. And right now, we're probably, in the last several years, we're probably one of the third lowest we've ever been on the affordability index. And so right now, fertilizer prices are good. And we have a lot of guys I've talked to over the years saying when they see that the phosphate and potash prices are lower, they add a little bit more. And then when prices go up, they don't apply as much, so they can bank that P and K, which is a smart thing to do. So, when you make comparisons, you want to say what time frame are you looking at, and there's also a lot of things that go hand in hand. Like Joe said earlier, there's times when we see some prices very low, but they're in the Gulf and the river's shut down. We can't bring stuff up if we wanted to. And so it doesn't do a lot of good, but nobody else can either. The other thing that I want to talk about a little bit on the fertilizer, there's a lot of other things going on in the world that change things very dramatically. Recently we were told that China has that coronavirus. Well, the province where they're actually producing the majority of the phosphate in China is in that province, and so they're not getting a lot of information out whether they're producing a lot of phosphate, whether they're not, whether the workers are showing up, And so nobody knows. Now, I know China does not bring a lot of product into the U.S., but if they have less product available, it's then who they normally will supply will not be able to buy it from them, so they buy it from somebody else that might compete with tons that come to the U.S. So it changes the world dynamics. We've also had major weather problems. As we all know, last year we were supposed to get barges the first 10 days in March. Our first barges arrived at June 15th. So we had to scramble and unload at other docks, trucking a long ways, did a lot of things.
Is that just because of the flooding and the locks being closed? And
every time that we just about ready to open a lock and we get a rain, and then it would shut the lock back down. So we continue to have all kinds of issues like that. There's always some outside pressures that change things sometimes on a moment's notice. And so, and probably, one of the other things that we see that I see that's a big concern, and I think it'll affect fertilizer pricing and so forth, is that our farmers are so efficient, between the genetics, between the new traits and everything, that we are producing, we can produce a lot of grain. Last year, we probably had one of the worst springs to get the crop in, and probably one of the worst falls to get the crop out, yet we still grew 13.7 billion bushel corn crop. There's a lot of projections out there now that if we plant 94 million acres of corn, which a lot of people think we may, that might be on the high side, but let's just use that number, and the average is 178.5 bushel, we're going to produce 15.47 billion bushels of corn. If we can produce 13.7 billion in a poor year, what can we do in a good year? And with that, it could really hurt the grain prices. But again, if we have that affordability index, it might not be a bad thing. But there's a lot of concern out there because our farmers are so efficient in growing a crop. The only good thing I can say is I think that around the world, when you have higher prices of grain, it opens up more acreage. And when you open up more acreage to grow things, then the demand for inputs go out there, and so more fertilizer needed, so it raises the price. U.S. has to be one of the lowest cost producers of grain in the world. And then when you get lower cost grain or lower priced grain, it puts a lot of acres around the world out of production. So
what's the lock situation this year? If we don't have major flooding, are we going to be able to move barges and move product up the river like normal?
The Corps of Engineers put out, the notice some time ago, so we try and plan around it, but they're going to open up the river about 30 days later for us. Lock 25 has got work going to be done. It will not open until March 30th, which means we won't get barges up till the first 10 days in April, assuming we don't have any water issues. And that's a full month later than normal. So there's a little concern there if we have an early spring that product could get tight on some products.
What about phosphate, Henry? I know you talk about that. You talk about Morocco and then out of Florida, what they're doing down there. What's the dynamics going on there?
I don't know if I talked about this last time, but the North American production, like in Florida, the cost to produce a ton of phosphate, 25% of the cost is an environmental cost. And so
that's restoring the ground back to the way it was.
They produce a gypsum, which is a byproduct that's got very, very slight radioactivity, and they have huge gyp piles down there, and they have to keep all the water and process all the water off those gyp piles, and they cannot let any of it go anywhere. So it's an ongoing cost. And recently, the Moroccans they can produce a lot of phosphate, and they have a zero cost on the environmental because we are told that they literally take their gypsum and they just dump it in the ocean.
So their byproduct after they mine out,
They just dump it in the ocean.
keep the phosphate and throw the gyp in the ocean.
And so and most people say that they have about a $70 per ton cost advantage over the North American producers.
So what are U.S. producers doing right now
Losing money.
on phosphate?
Yeah, most of them, right now they're maybe breaking even because for a long time there. It'll be interesting. Mosaic's the largest producer. Last quarter, they said they lost an average of $6 per ton publicly. And the prices went down since then. They've come back some. They're going to announce their next quarter next week, so I'll be interested to see how they're doing it. And so we don't know what's going to happen, but they have cut production significantly because they just don't feel comfortable, to keep production going strong and lose money at these when you're taking a product out of the ground that's a limited natural resource.
So phosphate, by all means, is a good buy right now. I mean, as far as if you're going to put a little extra phosphate on, this would be probably a good time.
Affordability index, compared to crops right now, I would say yes.
So what about potash?
Well, potash is, years ago when demand picked up significantly, there was major expansion, greenfield expansion, brownfield expansions. And because of it, we now have way too much production, and there's significant production in the world that is now shut down because we got too much. And because of that, it has driven the prices of the potash down to some very reasonable levels. And we continue to see that. And if they want to, they can bring that production on very rapidly if they need to. There was a joke, several years ago when corn got $7, potash got $800-900 a ton, and they said that one of the major companies was mining and they had a problem. And they called the CEO and they said, "Bill," he said, "we got a problem." "What's that?" He says, "We're mining potash up here in Canada. We hit a streak of gold." He goes, "Well, just keep digging through it. You'll eventually get through it," he said.
So, okay, the last component, of course, is nitrogen, and we should talk about sulfur too, because that's really gaining a lot of popularity now and becoming really that fourth component in corn production and in soybean and wheat too. So tell us about nitrogen and sulfur.
Well, probably the big topic on nitrogen was, there was a major company out there, CF Industries is probably the largest producer of UAN in the world, and in past history, in order to balance production, supply and demand, they would export a fair amount of tons to Europe, and Europeans filed a dumping suit against them, saying that they were dumping it into Europe below their cost. And Europeans won that. So they couldn't do that anymore. Well, they also levied that against, I think, some Trinidad tons and some Russian tons. Well, then all of a sudden now, the Russians, Trinidad, are coming to the U.S. CF can't export into there, so plus we have 3 major new plants that have been built completed in the last few years, so a lot of this production is finally ramped up, and we're starting to see some excess product out there a little bit. But they do have the capability of switching their production to DEF and urea and other things to try to balance it out. But we're seeing some of the same things we're seeing in some of the other products, that we're just getting an overexpansion of production right now.
So supply is good on all the products.
If it's in the
no
right,
shortages.
if it's in the right location.
If it's in the right location. Now, question for you, Henry. You manage 4 terminals along the Mississippi River. What's going to be Merschman Fertilizer's supply situation?
We planned ahead of time for the late lock opening, and but we have to balance it that we don't, because we have these markets up and down, and we got to make sure we don't want to put too much in and then have the market go down and then get hurt really bad. So but we have a good supply, and we feel I've been doing this 38 years now, so I've seen a lot of things. So hopefully we've done things right.
Okay.
So.
Anybody else have any questions for Henry? Well, thanks for the report.
And Joe, I know you asked me to come on this show because you had a request. So I want to thank that one guy that requested me.
Yeah, he's over at Blandonsville, Illinois. I can tell you that
Joe
much. says,
says, "Hey, we've had requests." I said, "Really? How many?" He goes, "1." I said, "Okay, that's better than none."
Just say thanks, Tom. The other thing we want to make a mention too is the Mamert family sending in a photo of their whole family watching Cup of Joe. So we say hi to them today too. So
yeah, I told them they're going to set their alarm at 4:30 tomorrow and get ready and get set up for 5 a.m.
I don't think we're quite that popular yet, Henry. Anyhow, let's go with Ben here, and what this week do you want to talk about?
I'm announcing our launch for next year's sales season of a Group 5.0. We haven't had a 5.0 in a couple different years, so we're bringing an Olympus 2150E brand Merschman soybean. The unique thing about this Olympus that we should have good supply of for next year is that it is a root knot bean. So we're going to fill in a little bit of a hole there for Southern Illinois, Southern Missouri.
Okay, great.
Yep. So it's got a Peking gene, so it's going to be excellent on all the nematode species.
Wow.
And
That's unique.
Yep. So it's a new bean. It's going to be popular in the marketplace. I'm really excited to bring on that 5.0. So
Good. Turk, I see you got some notes down.
I just kind of a little bit of a follow-up to what Henry was talking about the barge traffic in the Mississippi River. The Corps of Engineers announced this week that there's going to be they're going to spend $85 million doing work to the Mississippi to actually deepen it in areas where they normally have trouble. Now, it's really hard to believe that anybody's talking about making the Mississippi River deeper in areas, but that's the problem that we've had is because of all of the flooding that we've had and all the silting in. It's really silted in, and now it is a problem. So there's a major effort to try and get the Mississippi River dredged out, barges or fixed locks that need to be fixed so that they can handle more traffic faster, and so. And I look for that to continue on for several years here now. The fact that they were actually recognizing the problem that most all farmers have known that it's been a problem, and anybody that's on the Mississippi River has known that there's been a problem for a long time. They're actually spending some money now to actually do these upgrades and do that. So it'll help be very good for farmers to be able to export soybeans and bring fertilizer back.
Oh, it's critical to our infrastructure to make us a world producer and low-cost producers to have that low-cost transportation.
Yeah.
So that's great.
it was a fairly commonplace, wasn't it, back in the 80s and 70s to do a lot of dredging? We just haven't had the infrastructure in place to be doing it. But I know as of last year, I don't remember, are we pool 18 or 19?
19.
In pool 19, there were barges getting stuck last summer in pool 19.
There was always funding, and because the government spending keeps trying to figure out where they can take it away from, that was one area that they were taking away from.
Last spring we had so much flooding in all the Midwest rivers. I think it was the Arkansas River.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They had so much dredging to do that they literally were shut down till October, I think, after the floods from the spring to get everything open. That's how much they did. And the other thing, I don't know if you know this, but the Illinois River stays open year round.
Mm-hmm.
But they have locks, and they have to do, so they're shutting down the whole Illinois River, I think July 1st through September or October. 100% shut down.
Farmers will be interested to know that for
Well,
marketing
they
plans.
announced that probably 2 years in advance so people can make plans around it. But they have to take it down. We're up here, we shut them down we're shut down in the winter because of ice, so they do the maintenance then.
Well, logistics are an important part of farming and agriculture, and important to our businesses, and keeping cost of food as low as possible for the poorest of the poor, no question about it, when it comes to exports. My comments this week have to do with Sinclair Tractor, which is our local Southeast Iowa John Deere dealerships, and they held a yield force meeting on Thursday where they go, and again, if you remember a year ago, we attended it too, and it's where they recap what the yields are and what fungicides worked well, how nitrogen applications, planting dates, and it's all what I call precision farming type information using the John Deere equipment. And I just got to give a hats off to them as what they do for farmers, because they give each farmer their own little book, calculates their break-even costs, everything exactly right down, so it makes them very efficient from the standpoint of knowing where to sell and what price point they got to have to make a profit. And I told them, I said I wish there was a program like that for seed companies too. So because they rank you according to your peers and according to trend lines and averages, and you can find out if you're above the line or below the line. But I got to give Sinclair Tractor and their group of agronomists a big thumbs up for what they're doing for farmers to help them during this difficult time. And I know this coming year they're planning to do a lot more on profitability. In other words, finding and fine-tuning those costs. So we all fit into this big system, from the manufacturers to the fertilizer distributors and the seed companies and the farmers, and we're all being pinched on margins and opportunities, and this is all part of it. So if we don't have anything else to add, I want to, yesterday was Valentine's Day, and I'm sure all the farmers are really in a good mood right now. After Valentine's Day, that's usually a special day. But so I thought I'd tell a post-Valentine's Day joke as part of our corny joke segment. What does a farmer give his wife on Valentine's Day? Hugs and kisses. Well, that's it for this week. We'll see you next week, and as always, be safe out there, and thanks for supporting Merschman Seeds and Merschman Fertilizer. Take care.